So each month I will be doing a free health webinar. I've been doing these for a few months now, and they've been highly successful. And for me, the biggest thing is just commitment. So I've committed to doing one a month. My host, Emily, she helps me to put them together. She hosts the webinars with me. And we've had people show up and ask amazing questions related to each topic. If you want to be part of these webinars, you just need to go in the show notes. There's actually a link. So go to the show notes of this podcast, click on that link. You'll just go to a page and put your email in, and then you will be signed up to be on the monthly webinar list, which means every month you'll get an email with the topic, and then you will be able to either attend the webinar or not. So you only need to sign up once, and then you can kind of pick and choose which webinars you would like to be a part of. This is great because it's a great time for you to ask me questions live. And then also we repurpose the podcast and we add them to our YouTube channel, or we reuse the webinar and we turn them into a podcast and we put them on our YouTube channel. So go check those out in the show notes. There's also a link on our website at stealthyhunter.com to sign up for the free monthly health webinar. This month, we're going to be talking about keeping a healthy blood sugar, and that's going to be October 25th. So if you want to be part of that, go and sign up. So today is World Menopause Day. That's right, ladies. If you're like me and you've been through menopause, whether it's natural, medical, then we have a day, I guess, where we celebrate menopause. I thought today's podcast topic, besides just menopause, I thought I would share my story that I've been going through really the last 10 years, and specifically the last 2 to 3 years. I wanted to share this because on the podcast, we talk a ton about men's health, and you guys are really our market. So I don't want you guys to shut this podcast off, because this is actually directed at you as well. But we do talk about men's health a lot. We've talked about testosterone a ton on the podcast. And obviously that's one big area of interest of mine in my medical practice. So I see a lot of men. I do a lot of hormone replacement. I do a lot of lifestyle management for hormones for men. But what started happening a couple years ago when I started seeing so many men is I myself started really suffering from perimenopause. And I also had a lot of my male patients saying, can you see my wife? Because she's having, whether she's in reproductive age or not, she's having a lot of hormonal issues, and I'd like you to see her. So I started getting more and more women and learning more and more about the process of perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause, and not just physically, not just like hormone related, but what are the changes that happen emotionally? What are the changes that happen mentally? Even the experiences that I've had in the last couple of years, and just seeing patients, seeing them where they're at, being with them in these somewhat difficult moments with hormonal change for women especially. We have so much power within ourselves to heal ourselves and to work on things. And I just don't feel like the medical model really supports that very well. So anyways, back to what I was saying, I started treating a lot of women who were in the same situation as me. And you can do all the research in the world, but if you haven't actually been through something, it's so difficult to sometimes to empathize with people. I'm not a male, obviously, and I don't know what it's like to have testosterone, at 1100 and have that feeling. And I don't have a male brain. So yes, I treat men, and yes, I do hormone therapy for men. And yes, I would say I'm sympathetic to men and their health issues and their mental struggles and their emotional struggles for sure. But I can't really empathize with them because I'm not a man, I'm not on the same hormonal cycles. I don't have the same brain as they do. So, it's one of those things like I was like, I can't totally empathize. Does that mean I shouldn't treat men? No, of course not. It just means that I may not totally understand what they're going through. But when it comes to women, obviously I can understand. I've been through puberty, I've been through reproductive years, I've been through perimenopause, and now I have been through menopause. And so as I was gravitating these women to me, it's actually kind of a very difficult couple years because I didn't have all the answers. And actually for myself, I didn't have all the answers. And I started to realize how different people are, how different each woman is. Just like men, how differently they are, how some men react to certain things great and some don't. It's the same thing with women. So, but I also felt sometimes at a loss for, I was experiencing the same symptoms, having the same emotional challenges. And then I have a woman just basically like mirroring me, sitting in front of me, telling me the same story. And I'm thinking to myself, gosh, I don't even have those answers for myself. How can I give them to her? So the last couple of years have really been a learning experience for me in sitting with patients and admitting that I don't know everything, but at the same time, learning to give encouragement in a way that empowers them. And I have tried really hard going through my experience of menopause to transform what this means in a woman's life into positivity and not negativity. Because the social culture at large is very negative about menopause. Actually, what I hear from most women and what I actually feel myself is that menopause is an age of invisibility. You become a woman who suddenly becomes invisible to the world. And I think a lot of that is more revolved around women throughout their life looking for male acknowledgement. And when you become middle age and you are no longer reproductive and you've got a little more fat on your body and you have more wrinkles, and you, again, if you're looking for male acknowledgement, that can be difficult because at this age there are always younger, more beautiful, more reproductive women than you. And women struggle with that, even if it's not conscious, it can be subconscious. So today I wanted to just discuss a little bit of some of the symptoms that I experienced and that you might be experiencing if you're a woman listening to this. And if you're a husband, if you're a partner of a woman who's going through perimenopause or menopause right now, to give you some tools to help you either one, help her in the little way that you can, and to maybe understand and to not take things personally because that can be very difficult. This is perimenopause and menopause, about the decade between the 40s and the early 50s. This is not without its challenges, its suffering, and for sure, you have to learn to pivot, both male and female. So a little bit of my story. I had a baby at 42, which most of you know, our lovely little daughter, Tana. I had her at 42 and she was not planned, but she has been really the light of our life. And we are so sorry, so excited that she came to be when she did. But when I had her, I was 42 and I had a very difficult labor. I didn't have a difficult labor, but I did hemorrhage after my labor and I lost a lot of blood. And it was sort of a dangerous situation. I came back from that, not without a little bit of trauma and a lot of anemia. And if any woman or man has ever gone through anemia where you have blood loss and you literally can't lift your head off a pillow for a bit of time, it's very difficult to get over. And I think that that is where perimenopause started for me, was after the birth of her and having to recover from that traumatic incidence of hemorrhaging. And I think what happened is it just kind of threw my hormones into a tailspin. I also have seen it in other patients as well. In your 40s, your hormones are already starting to change. Some of the research shows as early as 39, you can start to have perimenopausal symptoms. And so for me, I think it just kind of spun me into perimenopause because your hormones tank right after you give birth anyways. And I think my hormones tanked and they just never really fully recovered. So perimenopause is usually the decade before menopause. Some women it's 1 year before menopause, some women it's 10 years before menopause. And it's where estrogen is starting to drop. So every month estrogen is going up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, but estrogen is slowly over time starting to go down. And then progesterone, it's also kind of typically a low progesterone state. And so these are two of the female hormones that basically make us female, and they have different peaks at different times of the month. And if you want to learn more about the actual hormonal process themselves, I did a whole webinar on women's health hormones through the life cycle. So you can go back and listen to that podcast or whatever. And so progesterone naturally starts to go down as well. And progesterone is how I describe progesterone is she's like the older firstborn sister who keeps the house clean and she babysits and she's more responsible and that kind of thing. Estrogen is more like the little sister. She's very the Goldilocks hormone. So she has to be in this happy place. And if she's not, she's either too high or too low. We see a lot more disharmony. And so progesterone really helps to keep her in check. Progesterone is also important for confirming ovulation and, creating the corpus luteum so that if an egg were to be fertilized, that would implant into the endometrial lining, and the progesterone is what keeps that lining intact so that a baby can grow. So a lot of women, have miscarriages or don't get pregnant easily because they have progesterone deficiency. So it's also very common in reproductive years. But we see this happen in the 40s, and this can sometimes be why it's harder to actually get pregnant in your 40s. Now, don't take that lesson from me because I thought it was going to be hard to get pregnant in my 40s, and I had a baby in my 40s. So perimenopause can also kind of throw your hormones around. So you're not having regular menstruation. And so you're kind of thinking, oh, well, I couldn't get pregnant and whatnot. But there are definitely a lot of whoops that happen in the 40s. There's also a lot of women that haven't had children. They're trying to get pregnant in their 40s. And that can be more difficult because of these changing hormones. And so and the progesterone dropping and these kinds of things. So again, 40s is sort of this preparation for getting you ready, preparation and getting ready, same thing, getting you ready to lose estrogen from the ovary and lose progesterone. So this does take time. And so mine kind of started after Tana was born and I recovered from that. And then I just had a lot, kind of my main symptoms were just a lot of fatigue, obviously from the anemia, and a lot of brain fog, a lot of brain issues, a lot of forgetting things, that kind of stuff. And then just up and down emotional states. And, obviously stress plays into this, but, who doesn't have a stressful life? And then, having 2 young children, having a business. Ryan and I made a huge move, in 2018 to Montana. And so just a lot coming up. And I think that that history all entwined with the hormonal changes that are naturally going on. My body just was, dealing with all this. I think the frustration of this is that, women still need to be productive citizens in society. A lot of us have jobs and careers now. We need to be there for our children. A lot of us are sleep deprived because we're maybe still caring for young children, or maybe your children are grown in your 40s. That's probably the more common thing. And maybe you've got older parents and you're taking care of them, or you're taking care of your extended family, or you are working like crazy and you're not getting good sleep. And sleep definitely gets affected by the hormonal changes and estrogen changes. So I started going through all that. And then in 2020, I think it was, I was starting to do pretty good and get pretty settled in. And I talked to my doctor, my gynecologist, and I was like, I'm just kind of having irregular hormonal stuff. And a lot of my patients have an IUD. I see it in so many women. They use the Marine IUD, which is a progestin, which is a synthetic progesterone IUD. And she had suggested that maybe I get an IUD so that there was going to be no fear of me getting pregnant. And obviously that would have been a nightmare for me at that age. And so I agreed to do it because I feel like I saw lots of women do it. Now, when I was much younger, in my 20s, early 20s, I went on birth control because I did have a condition called endometriosis. And I haven't talked about this, but I did have endometriosis as a very young gal in puberty and I had a lot of problems with it. And I had 2 surgeries over my life, laparoscopy surgeries for endometriosis. And I really attribute being able to get pregnant in my 30s and obviously my 40s because of these surgeries. So I did have a history with hormonal dysregulation, especially estrogen, when I was younger. But I had not been on any type of birth control since my early 20s, and the birth control was used to control the symptoms of endometriosis. So a lot of women probably listening to this, or husbands who their wives have it, it's very debilitating and very painful. So they put you on birth control to drop your natural levels of estrogen, progesterone, mainly estrogen, to stop that inflammatory reaction by the endometrial tissues. But I was always sick on birth control. I never felt good on birth control. So I was not on it very long. I had those surgeries. That was great. It was better. I did a lot of alternative. This is really as I was also getting into my functional medicine, lifestyle, diet, acupuncture. I was using Chinese herbs. Lifestyle medicine is so profound for something like endometriosis, but the surgeries did make very large impacts in my life. So I decided, sure, I'll go on this Mirena IUD. So I had this Mirena IUD put in September of 2020. And I think it was 2020. No, it was September of 2019. I can't even remember. We were doing telemedicine. Yeah, so it must have been 2020. Anyways, and then my health took a sharp turn after that. What started happening was I started having massive depression. Now, this is a normal symptom in perimenopause and menopause, is depression. Actually, one of the most prescribed drugs for menopause is SSRIs, or antidepressants. But I started having severe depression, like no voices in my head. You know how you always have this little voice in your head talking to you about like, oh, you need to do this today, or you need to do that, or you're feeling like this, or you're not feeling like that. I literally lost any voice in my head. I became like super apathetic and almost like detached from everything. I was having these episodes of what I call post-exercise paralysis, where I would exercise, which is my number one antidepressant and my number one lifestyle strategy for staying happy. And I was working out constantly all the time. I mean, I was great working out. I started getting this post-exercise paralysis where basically I couldn't move my limbs. Then I was having anxiety attacks, heart palpitations, and worsening and worsening and worsening fatigue. And on top of it, I got vertigo, like really bad. Now, I had a brain injury in 2004. I had a bad mountain bike accident, and I think I've talked about that before. And that was a huge pivot in my life as well. That was another big trauma in my life that I think laid the groundwork for a lot of my future problems, especially during this hormonal shifting time. But vertigo was kind of one of my longer standing symptoms from that. So whenever I did anything that was going to affect my nervous system, I always get vertigo. And I think I talked about that in my sauna podcast with Sam and Steve. Was I did Botox once and I got horrible vertigo, and I will never do it again. But my body is very, very neurologically sensitive. And that's pretty much why, minus the stupid decision of the Botox, I don't really inject anything into my body unless it's, I absolutely have used it before and it's fine, but most of the time I just try to not do that because my nervous system is so sensitive. And so I started having all these neurological things and vertigo, and it was just getting worse and worse and worse. And by Christmas, I got it in September, and by Christmas, I was pretty dysfunctional. I was sort of like in bed. And the funny thing is, the person that started researching all the problems with this was Ryan, because I was literally working and going to bed. And I didn't talk about this on the podcast because, oh my God, you feel like you're one way and you're telling people to be another. And, you've got a podcast and you're telling people about health, and here you are suffering. And I just obviously too, how do you talk about something like this? So Ryan started researching it, and he started finding all these class action lawsuits and problems and with these IUDs. And I kept kind of saying to myself, well, I've had vertigo before. Maybe I'm just having another episode, or maybe I'm just tired from work, or, and I do believe that I was in perimenopause. So I know that was going on. But I think what happened once I started putting the pieces together was that the Mirena dropped my progesterone to almost nothing. And I was already probably somewhat deficient in progesterone just due to perimenopause. And it messed with my hormones so bad that, progesterone is important for decreasing anxiety. It's important for calming you down. It helps you sleep. And the other neurotransmitters, serotonin and stuff that play into happiness and depression. And I think it just messed with that in me because I'm sensitive. And when we started reading these cases of women that were having the exactly same problems, that were buried in the media, started reading the side effects, I realized this is not for me. And so luckily, my doctor who put it in, I called her right after Christmas and said, I think this thing is basically killing me. I need to get it out. And she was like, okay, let's do it. Took it out. And within 3 months, I bounced back and I was back to myself. And so I realized at that time that my hormones were changing. And maybe because I'd never done good on birth control, I suffered with that. But that was kind of where I think a lot of this story started, was when I took that Mirena. Then in 2021, Ryan and I got COVID, and he got all the respiratory symptoms. I got all the neurological symptoms. And we've done a podcast on that. I have not talked much about my long COVID, and I plan to do a podcast on that because it's actually very complicated. And there's literally over a year of learning and processing on that and what helped me. And I would love to share that with all of you, but it is taking me time to process that. But what happened when I got COVID and I got the neurological cytokine storm in my brain, my period stopped. I started having hot flashes at night. I couldn't sleep. I was hot flashing all night, sweating like crazy. And this is a normal also symptom of COVID. So what started happening was I was having a lot of symptoms of the COVID, and I was also having a lot of symptoms of menopause. I was having massive depression, anxiety, heart palpitations, histamine intolerance, hot flashes, bladder issues, joint pain all over my body, massive body pain everywhere. And I had been doing testosterone therapy for a number of years, and I've talked about that on the podcast as well. That helped me tremendously with a lot of my perimenopausal symptoms. And so I was using that. And then when I did the Mirena, it kind of threw me off. And then once that was out, I was still doing testosterone, feeling really good. And then when I got COVID and I got that neurological reaction, which makes sense because that's how I am, really the testosterone was just not enough to make up for basically what was the loss of estrogen. So think what you want about the vid, think what you want about the vaccines, whatever. I basically got put right into menopause when I got COVID. So I went through a year of long COVID, and that's when menopause started for me. And I will say that it's probably been one of the most difficult, emotionally difficult times in my life. One, because I was trying to come back from COVID, which was really difficult for me. But I think mixed into that, I can't blame it all on COVID, was that I was in menopause. And I was having a lot of symptoms related to that. And when I said in the beginning, this whole idea of being able to empathize with somebody, like being able to understand where they are, it was like all those women that were sitting across from me having all those symptoms and having gone through menopause and having all the problems. It was like all of a sudden I was like right there. I could like, oh my God, I get it, you know, like walking in a room and literally not remembering why you walked in there, feeling constantly emotionally unstable. Having, you know, just like being hot like constantly, which was so new for me. That's not my norm. Having really bad sleep. My sleep was already bad because I was more of an anxious person anyways. I never really slept good, but like sleep was so bad, waking up super, super early and just like not being able to sleep, you know, all these stories women were telling me. So I began playing around with HRT and hormone replacement therapy, and kind of through that COVID year, estrogen, progesterone, they did help me quite a bit. But it's been a 2-year process in menopause for me. So the other thing is that they tell you menopause is 12 months, no bleeding. That's the clinical term. So once you've been through those 12 months, no menstruation, after that, you're postmenopausal, and then you go on with life. But I rarely meet a woman that literally stops bleeding and then 12 months later hasn't had anything happen, and then they're done. It's so rare. Most women, sometimes it takes 2 to 3 years. Like you think you're in menopause and you go 6, 8 months and then boom, 2 months and then boom, it stops. And then it's just like, you never really know where you are. And some months you can feel your estrogen is really high, and then a bunch of months your estrogen is really low. And so it's a very tumultuous time. You know, I do think perimenopause, so I would still consider this the perimenopause, menopause state, but that is such a tumultuous time. It's way more tumultuous than postmenopause because your body's done it. Your body's kind of morphed now. It kind of understands. And if you need hormone therapy, you know, replacement therapy and stuff, you know, use that. And I'm not going to really go deep into hormone therapy in this podcast because I just want to share more of the emotional state of the menopausal woman. So I always am doing tons of reading because I'm always thinking about these things. And I started reading about estrogen. You know, what is happening in menopause? You're losing estrogen. Your ovaries are going to sleep, basically. Estrogen and progesterone going down. And so here's just a short list. And this is an important list because you can also have these in perimenopause if you have months where estrogen is low. And this is a short list too for men that are listening to this and their wives are going, 1 month they seem fine, 1 week they seem fine, and then like the next day they're like horrible and everything's crazy. Is that understand that our brain, who we are, is so controlled by these hormones. And the transition that happens when you lose them, it is literally like a metamorphosis that happens. And it's not easy. It's sort of like the suffering of being pregnant and birthing a baby. What comes out the other end is a beautiful, wonderful life. But there's the suffering that gets there, you know, and I would kind of hope to think death was like that. It's like the suffering of death and the pain and the trauma, but then on the other side, there's something beautiful, and that's the next stage of life, right? So here's just a few symptoms that I experienced and that some of you might be experiencing as well. So hot flashes, number one, usually for low estrogen. And it could be you're just hot. It could be that you're actually flashing and sweating like crazy. It could be that you're having night sweats and you're just only hot. You're only flashing at night when you're sleeping. Sleeping really hot is very common. That's my biggest thing. I don't really have hot flashes during the day. I'm getting more and more hot flashes during the day, but I get hot at night, and it's this summer about killed me. Lightheadedness, vertigo, dizziness, headaches, irritability, depression, anxiety, sleeplessness, unusual tiredness, backaches, joint pain, loss of motivation, muscle pain, dry skin, crawling feelings in your skin, pins and needles in extremities, obviously decreased libido, sexual desire, even problems with orgasm, vaginal dryness, bladder problems. Again, you need estrogen for all those things, and the collagen matrix. So estrogen makes up part of the collagen matrix. And one that I found out of this list to be the most interesting to me, feeling unloved. So think about that in your life, with the women in your life, or if you're a woman listening to this, like how much throughout your day at this age and in this process do you feel like nobody loves you? Even when you have the best partner, children, colleagues, family, you're blessed beyond belief like me. How often do you walk through your day and feel like nobody loves you? Nobody can possibly know how you feel. Everybody's out to get you. Nobody's listening to you. You feel taken advantage of. You don't feel like anybody gives you gratitude. These are all feelings of feeling unloved. And you know what? Estrogen supports that in women. So as we start to lose estrogen, we start to feel unloved. And when we start to feel unloved in our life, we sometimes are unloving, meaning we don't reciprocate love very well. Now, I say this because men sometimes take our emotional reactions to things or the way we're acting, or just, Ryan calls it the scowl on my face or whatever. You know, some men don't notice. They don't care, whatever. I would hope the men listening to this do care. And if you live with a woman who's going through these hormonal changes, it's affecting you, guaranteed. But some men are better than others at emotionally withdrawing, maybe not even reading into it that much. And some of you may be accepting and you may be like, well, this is just what's happening because, you know, your wife's been having periods ever since you guys were together. And you men know when women are having periods, they're going to have a period, you know, just by the look on her face, just how she's acting. I mean, I have a teenage daughter. I can tell. I know. So, you know, you get tuned into people, you're tuned into your family. And so, you know, from a lot of men, they sort of remove themselves when the women are starting to act like this, or they don't know what's wrong because they don't want to like get into it. They don't want to get in the middle of it. They feel offended as well. And what's interesting too is if you have a partner who has low testosterone as well, testosterone makes men feel loved. So if you have two partners where a woman is losing her estrogen and a man doesn't have enough testosterone, they both are going to have the feelings of inadequacy and not being loved. That's not a good mixture. So if your wife is exhibiting these issues and she's in this time of her life, remember that it's not necessarily even controllable by her what she's thinking. If she's thinking she's not loved by you or whoever, it's a hormonal change. The receptors are not getting what they need, just like in men. Your testosterone receptors are not getting filled in the brain. So you have a lot more depression, you have a lot more anxiety, you feel unloved, you feel unrespected. And so just take that into, you know, thoughts. If you have a wife who's going through these things and she's being really emotionally reactive and she's not being very grateful towards you, or she's resentful, part of that is because maybe she just needs to be shown more love. You withdrawing from her doesn't help her. It actually makes her feel worse. So just these small actions that men and women have to do, I think, to one, be able to tolerate each other and live with each other, because we are such different beings. We're hormonally such different beings, which makes us emotionally much different beings. But sometimes it's that whole idea, guys, of like, you don't need to fix it. You just need to be there, listen, give her a hug, hold her, let her cry. Don't run away. Don't hide from her. Don't stonewall her. Because sometimes that's all it takes and she feels better. And actually, your action towards her of that will possibly raise her estrogen while she still has it. So We also know that postmenopausally, when women have fully been through the process, that when they do estrogen replacement and they can handle estrogen replacement, they also feel more loving and they feel more loved. So this to me really stood out. And I think that's why I wanted to do this podcast, was to just encourage people going through these hormonal changes in their relationships and in their own lives, that these hormones can reflect a lot of how we feel about ourselves and how others feel about us. And sometimes those projections are not accurate, but that's the signals that the body may be picking up with due to the lack of these hormones. So just something to think about. Now, I'm not going to talk about this much longer. I'll probably do a hormone replacement podcast for women just to understand estrogen and to make better choices if you're going through menopause and you want to learn about hormone replacement therapy. But I do want to say that, again, turning this on the positive, is that when you become this age and you've gone through all the things you've gone through in your life and you've created life, or maybe you didn't create life with your own body, but you've created things in your life. Women are creative. They create. That's what they do. And you get to this time and you start feeling non-creative. You start feeling lost. You start wondering, what is my next step, especially if your children are older and they've left. And, children are only with us a very short time, and women tend to put a lot of all their fruit in that basket. And children leaving the home is one of the most 5 top traumatic things that happen to people in life. And it mainly happens to women. And that's because of that hormonal connection to your children. But it's also a time of like, you've done that work, you've created those things. Now, what can you create for yourself? And who are you? And what are the emotional things that you need to look inside of you? And how can you blossom as you come through menopause? And how can you live the next 50 years of your life with vitality and energy, and also respecting the new sort of quiet, reflective, meditative state that you go into when you go through menopause? So one of my top recommendations that I give to my women as we go through this, and we're doing labs and we're getting data and we're working on lifestyle and maybe we're doing hormone replacement. Number one is to have a space that's just yours, a space that you can go into and you can have quiet, because we got so much noise in our lives. And that, when you're losing your hormones, it gets harder and harder to tolerate the noise. That was one of the things too with COVID, because of my neurological symptoms. I mean, I had to wear earplugs all the time. I had to wear dark glasses. Like, everything was a sensory overload. And I've noticed with menopause, or maybe it was partly menopause too, because I kind of both at the same time. I'm very my senses are very heightened, and I am sensitive. Smells, bright lights, sounds. And so, but having that space where you can go and you can be in that meditative space, you can breathe, you can be quiet, you can read, you can pray, you can meditate. That is really vital for women, because you need to regenerate, and not just through exercise and not just through other people. Is you need to be able to get into a creative space within yourself that is also calming. And I've seen it time and time again that when women can do that, it's very transformative. And how I've done that is I get up every morning and I meditate. I meditate sometimes for 20 minutes, sometimes an hour. It depends on my day. If I got to go to work, I've got my kids, I've got responsibilities. I might get up a little earlier if I get the sleep I need. Sometimes I can't sleep because of my hormones. And so I just get up and I meditate. And I know it sounds funny. I do have a room in the house for meditate, like an extra room. My house is plenty big, but I have a big bathroom with a big bathtub. And I'm not taking a bath at 4:30 in the morning. I've got pillows in there, I've got a blanket in there, I've got some candles, I've got whatever pictures I want or whatever in my bathroom, my books, my journal, depending that day, what I'm looking at, my meditations, my Bible, whatever. I sit in my bathtub in the dark with the candle lit. And what I do is I literally go from bed. I have it set up at night before I go to bed. I have a glass of water in there. I have my headphones in there if I need them. I I get up, I brush my teeth, and I drink some water. And I do not turn my phone on. I never turn my phone on except to either turn my meditations on if I'm doing a guided meditation with some music or something. That's it. The phone should not come on first thing in the morning for anything other than like just using that resource. And that's what I do. That's my first thing. And I've gotten away from it. I've gotten away from it. When I got healthier and healthier, I got further and further away from it. And then as I sometimes have months where I got COVID a month ago or so again, and I went right back into some of my symptoms, and I was like, okay, I have to go. What helped me last time? I was back to meditation. And now it's like my body just wakes up. It's like, okay, you gotta go meditate. You gotta go sit and be quiet. So I highly recommend that for women. And that can be hard because our brains are just right. The other one is community. You need a community of women. You need women. You need women around you. Men are lovely. Your partners are lovely. You men out there who are supporting your women and your families, you are needed, you are wanted, you are respected, you are loved, but you're not women, and we can't expect you to be. So try to find a community of women, and that's actually been hard for me. And that's hard for me. I used to have a community of women. I have a smaller community of women now, but I am searching for that, and I'm working on that. And that's part of the reason I started the Harrisante retreats for women, because I want to create this community of women. I want to create something that I've watched in the last, 4 to 5 years as I've gotten deeper and deeper into this and had my own experience and realized what I need. I want that for other women. And so find a community. And if you have one, that's awesome. Whether it's through exercise, whether it's through your children, whether it's through your church, your spiritual group, find that community, because that will help to heal your hormones. That will help you to empathize more, sympathize with people. Women are community oriented. Instinctually, our brains are built for that. And so having your own space, being quiet, but also finding your community. And you may be searching that for a while. That may be hard. I know it is for me. So that, has been my experience. And obviously I'm doing a lot of other things, trying to be as consistent as I can. But giving yourself grace is really important. This is honestly a very exhausting time of your life. Your body is meant to be resting, and most of us are not. Most of us are not resting. And the sadistic thing about it is like you should be resting, and then because you're losing your hormones, you can't actually sleep. And sleep is so important at this time of your life. And if you can't get it, it makes you a little crazy. So that's why I do like meditation as well, because it does actually put you into a state where you get some relaxation, but you don't necessarily have to be sleeping. So I just wanted to talk about this today because it's World Menopause Day, and I want you to remember too that in 1900, 4% of women lived past the age of 50. 4. So menopause, as far as in our culture, in the Industrial Revolution, I can't speak for back in the day. I don't know. I mean, there's been a long history of human existence. But since the Industrial Revolution, and the change of life for women and sanitation and water coming out of the tap and all the simple things that we have access to healthcare. Remember, there's places in the world women do not have access to healthcare, and these places have high mortality rates in women and children. Okay, this is in the United States. We live now to be in our 80s. So just in 1900, 4% of women live past the age of 50. So we have a lot to learn about menopause. We have a lot to learn about how to help ourselves. And, just remember, though, that we are very fortunate, and we can live longer lives. But this is a time of change and rebirth and transformation. And any transformation is never easy. So do the things that you can to help yourself have less suffering. One, guys, those of you in a relationship out there dealing with your women going through these things, give her more love, make her feel loved, because that's really all she needs. I mean, women just thrive on that. Even if she acts like she doesn't care about it, she needs it. She needs it. And women, just let your guard down a little bit. Accept that love. Accept what people are giving you, your children are giving you, your husband's giving you. Let them be there for you. Let them do the work for you, and let go of the things that are not that important. That's another lesson I've really struggled with. So to finish this, I'm going to read. I made a post today on Instagram, and I feel it's just very succinct and very kind of what I was trying to discuss today. But I'm just going to finish this podcast with this. And I hope that, it's a complicated world we live in today. I would say that in the world, women and children, unfortunately, take on the brunt of much suffering that goes on. And I can't fix all the things happening in the world, but what I can fix and what I can do is help myself to be a better person, so that in the case that I need to be there for somebody else, I can do that with a truly open heart. And I feel very blessed and fortunate that I am in the position that I am in to get this help. Today is World Menopause Day. Yep, us old wise women now have our own day. But honestly, we should, because menopause is actually a time of immense change in not only a woman's life, but her whole family's. The decade of perimenopause can feel like torture. We begin losing the estrogen that makes us feel loved, loving, and just overall normal. Our sleep gets horrible, our joints hurt more, our brains forget what we walked into the room for, our desires for just about everything change. As we move closer to less and less estrogen and progesterone, it just feels better when every window in the house is open in winter. Our husband thinks we're too bitchy or bossy, or perhaps not as caring as we used to be. Our kids get used to our emotional breakdowns and outbursts. Oh, that's just mom. It's a lot of just plain physical and emotional turmoil. But then enters menopause and the life after reproduction. Like the caterpillar becomes the butterfly, so is the woman who passes through this sacred veil of transformation. She has adapted to her new body with all its changes. Her brain becomes calmer, less scattered. She makes decisions based on energy, value, and wisdom. She becomes empowered and ecstatic that she no longer has to support the possibility of life each month. She becomes the grandmother who turns to support her daughter's struggle through the emotional waters of reproduction. She seeks balance, prayer, quiet, adventure, community, and truly begins to love herself. This is the menopause that no one talks about, and is what I hope to do each and every day with the women in my practice who went through so much to get here, to hold her hand and say, I understand, because I do. The Hunt Harvest Health Podcast and the Stealthy Hunter LLC, its managers and partners, we do not diagnose, prescribe, or replace the services of a healthcare professional. This podcast is not to be used as a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment of any health condition or problem, and any questions regarding your health should be addressed to your primary care physician or other healthcare provider.